Welcome to day 5. Yes, day 5 of Streaming Media East Connect. I lose track because this is our biggest Streaming Media Connect event that we've done out of 4 so far. We've had and will have a total of 33 panels and presentations this week, Monday, and then on Tuesday, we have the Content Delivery Summit. It's not going to be our last Streaming Media Connect either. We've got one coming up in August, and we'll have more information available about that soon. But we do plan to return to an in-person event. That was me knocking on wood. In November, Streaming Media West in Huntington Beach, November 2nd and 3rd. The call for speakers is open if you're interested in speaking at that event. And all the sponsorship information is available as well at the link that Steve just posted in the chat. As always, this and all of our panels are available on our Streaming Media YouTube channel. Steve will also post that link in the chat. And just a couple of housekeeping notes. The chat will be open to the audience, but if you have questions for our speakers, we ask that you put them in the Q&A tab. That just makes it easier for Tim, our moderator, to keep track of them and make sure that all those questions get asked to our panelists today. Before we jump into our discussion about content protection, I would like to thank our diamond sponsor, Signient, for helping to make Streaming Media East Connect possible. And we have a short video message from Signient now.
When the director calls action.
And action.
When the game is on.
Pick it up, it's good.
Or it's time to save the universe again. Media Shuttle is there. Trusted by more than 25,000 media companies, Media Shuttle delivers, making it easy and secure to send any size file anywhere fast. The journey begins with Media Shuttle portals, customized and branded for any project and designed to be so easy, your end users will love it. All while giving operations teams complete control through a simple yet powerful admin interface. Add users, set permissions, customize file delivery specs, and report on all activity. Blast off with proprietary acceleration technology. Media Shuttle moves your content anywhere in the internet-connected world at hyper speeds. Along the way, your files are protected. Our commitment to enterprise-grade security has made Media Shuttle a preferred tool with Hollywood studios, major sports leagues, broadcasters, and more. With Media Shuttle, your files are never handed over to Signient. File movement is orchestrated between the end user's workstation and your storage, whether on-prem or in the cloud. Your IT team simply provisions your storage, connecting it to the Media Shuttle cloud service, and Signient handles the rest. Get started on your Media Shuttle journey today, a journey without limits.
I would also like to thank the sponsor of this panel, Intertrust, particularly the Intertrust DRM division. And you know, as we put this panel together on protecting your content and your customers, we reached out to about 20 different potential speakers. And we found something that disappointed but didn't necessarily surprise us, is that we could find plenty of people who wanted to talk about content protection, but the companies they work for didn't necessarily want them to. I guess it's no surprise that companies are keeping their content protection strategies close to the vest and don't want to share too much or risk sharing too much. But as OTT consumption grows, content protection is at the top of everyone's minds. And so I know we're going to have a great discussion with Corey and Ali and our moderator, Tim, steering the ship. So Tim, I'll pass over to you now.
Hey, Eric, thank you. Appreciate that very much. And as Eric mentioned, it is one of those things that content protection, everybody wants for their content. Nobody really wants to necessarily talk about it. So we're delighted to have a couple people on today who do want to. Ali, since you're the sponsor of the session, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about Intertrust DRM solutions.
Thank you, Tim. So hi, everyone. This is Ali Hajat. I'm responsible for product marketing of media and entertainment solutions at Intertrust. It's great to be here. This is my, I think, fourth panel with the streaming media. Very exciting. And thank you for Eric and the team to put all these panels together. Intertrust has multiple divisions, but one is really focused on media solutions, and that's where I'm part of it. And we basically offer a set of security suite to protect content and support anti-piracy services. So a multi-DRM platform, a cloud-based multi-DRM platform for streaming services, and anti-piracy services, including content monitoring and forensic watermarking services. We do offer a broadcast security solution for broadcast TV, and also application shielding or application protection solutions, which are very hot today. Well, again, I'm happy to be here and talking to you, Corey, and yeah, exciting.
We're delighted to have you. Corey, so tell us a little bit about your company.
So I'm Corey Smith, Director of Live Operations for Activision Blizzard Esports. I run a technology group within Activision Blizzard King as our parent company. We are in charge of all of the technology stack for end-to-end broadcast. So all of the esports you see on YouTube and BlizzCon and all of the other things that the company does throughout the course of the year. Most likely my team has had some kind of touch or pulse on that broadcast. And so it's everything from cloud construction of shows, from switching and routing to distribution, to digital rights, to ad insertion technology, to single acquisition from venue. In this case, these days, it's acquisition from people's homes and living rooms and whatnot, but it is what it is. So happy to be here.
I'm sure production's changed quite a bit from that standpoint with having to pull from multiple people's homes. So a quick question for you, Corey. Why is content protection becoming more and more relevant in the industry today and as a whole?
Well, I think that as you could kind of see, all of the online streaming platforms really had to really bolster their business proposition over the last year and a half of the pandemic. We weren't going out and about to movie theaters. We weren't spending time at our friends and neighbors. We weren't spending a lot of time, doing other social activities that we've been so used to doing, forever, right? And then all of a sudden, you can't go anywhere. There's nowhere to go to, even if you were to leave the house. You can go get gas and groceries and stuff like that, but there's no entertainment value there. So all of the shift to online and the streaming entertainment completely going bonkers, you see a much more emphasized approach of we need to get our content out there. It may be first run type stuff because movie theaters aren't open and everything else. So we do need to protect that content. We have rights holders that we need to hold ourselves accountable for. And so that, the DRM explosion kind of happened, pretty organically, but it was the big shift of, our entire way of human nature completely changed.
It's interesting that you say that about not going to movie theaters, because ultimately what we've seen is the content as streaming has become even more and more valuable, therefore more reason to protect. Ollie, what do you want to add to that? Why is there a bigger need these days?
Right. So, Corey is absolutely right. And just to add to that, obviously the streaming platforms have to protect their service revenue, and they have to protect the value of the assets that are streaming to the consumer. So at the same time, they have to reduce subscriber churn, and they have to actually mitigate risk against piracy. So as the online consumption is growing up, the piracy landscape is growing as well. So that's a big factor. And it's a little different from traditional broadcast when you look at the streaming, because technically there's many options for the content. There are many devices that can consume the contents. You can consume the contents at different locations. That ultimately generates actually a larger surface attack for hackers to really attack and really attack the revenue of the service providers. So service content protection in our mind has to be part of the actual service protection. As you start building your service, your streaming service, you have to think about how you're protecting your service, and protecting the content and your target devices is part of that strategy. And you don't want to be caught off guard as basically get alerted when there is a leak. You want to be able to monitor the illegal activity throughout your video chain and be proactive rather than reacting to the kind of piracy afterwards.
Well, and you mentioned surface area, and I think that's a really important point, because the only way to, say, hack a movie in a movie theater is to bring a camera in with you. The only way to hack broadcast TV is to retrans. But in this particular scenario, with so many different apps and that kind of thing, it really makes it much easier for hackers to get access to surface area.
Absolutely.
So what about multi-DRM strategies? I mean, gone, it seems, are the days of single CDNs, and I guess it's sort of natural to look at it as moving beyond just single DRMs, but is there a need for multiple DRMs?
Yes, absolutely. And that's really because of the fragmentation in the devices and the operating systems, right? Consumers, obviously, as we said, wants to watch their content on every device. That includes Android, iOS platforms. That includes all the different type of browsers. And again, the DRMs are natively integrated on many of the OS platforms. So when you look at Chrome or Google browsers or Android devices, they already come with Widevine DRM natively integrated. And when you look at other devices like Apple, iOS or Safari, they come with FairPlay streaming DRM natively integrated. And the same thing with Microsoft and PlayReady. So suddenly, in order to reach all the different type of devices, you have to support the different DRMs, and multi-DRM is really like no-brainer for every streaming service provider.
Corey, do you all, from an Activision standpoint, use one DRM or multiple DRMs to the points that Ali was making?
We use a single DRM provider today, but the provider allows us to reach, to Ali's point, all of the device ecosystems that we have to manage, and because of the diversification of that, landscape of technology between browser, between actual machine hardware itself, or encode decode of the video paths and encryption, we have to be able to support multiple streaming formats as well. And so it kind of goes back to a problem with standards, right? Not necessarily a standards from a specific like innovation issue, but like an adoption perspective. Like you have one camp of hardware devices that uses a specific, DRM flavor and only uses a certain stream type. I think that from a scalability standpoint, that's going to continue to hamper our ability as broadcasters and storytellers to be able to build the best technology stack we can to deliver that message to this diverse ecosystem. MPEG dash, HLS, AV1, the battle between 265 and 264 over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, the licensing rights on codecs. It's all kind of hampering our ability to get beyond like the standards conversation to get to a device ecosystem that allows us to all interop together. That makes the cost of entry easier for us to manage and maintain. But to the point of all the device ecosystems, now you have to pretty much pick a partner that's going to be able to scale with you, right? It's really about the TPS, the transactions per second of the license acquisition. It's not just a matter of like, I can stamp encryption all day long on my video content. Do I have a service provider from a client perspective that can go from 0 to 1.5 million viewers concurrent within a few minutes? And that's where I think that a lot of the live event scaling, weighs heavily on some of these providers that are out there in the field today.
And so if I can add, Tim, so obviously a lot of streaming platform providers, they work with one vendor who actually provides a multi-DRM platform, right? So when I say there are multiple DRMs sometimes needed, doesn't mean you have to work with different vendors. Obviously, what we do is to provide a platform that covers all the different type of devices I said, based on the target DRM used in those platforms. So just to clarify that.
Yeah, no, that's a good clarification. And what's fascinating in hearing you all speak is, we went through a period of years in the early days of streaming. And when I say early, the late 90s and early 2000s, where we had multiple DRM schemes, we had multiple codecs, et cetera. We sort of settled into H.264, which allowed us, to Corey's point, to sort of scale. But now we're back to different formats, different delivery formats, different players, and different DRMs, creating a fairly complex web of non-scalability, so to speak. Ollie, to that point, you know, the idea with Dash was to essentially do a standards-based equivalent of HLS or smooth streaming or HDS. CENC, the Common Encryption Scheme, was also set up to do that. How has that fared in the industry, you know, in terms of adoption and that type of thing?
Right. I mean, obviously, one of the challenge has been between the DRM platforms that have been using a different encryption mode. So actually, when you look at basically between Dash and HLS, right, and using Widevine, Fairplay, and PlayReady. So they all have used either counter mode or CBC mode for encrypting the content. So the idea of common encryption was to kind of unify this, because if you had to encrypt with basically CBC and AES counter, that means you have to encrypt twice. You have to have two different type of formats. But the problem was not just about encryption, it was about file format as well. And that's why CMAF actually came in, right? So CMAF, which is a common media application format, is designed to basically combine the HLS and Dash into a unified format that can be used on all the devices. And it requires obviously a common encryption, or basically using the same encryption mode for all the DRM. So it's actually a good approach, and it has been evolving in the industry. There's a lot of vendors actually looking into actually using CMAF today. I remember last streaming media actually event, I was listening to Disney, Hulu, and another company, and they always saying that they're encoding all their new contents with CMAF, right? That was a good endorsement of CMAF, because again, you want to have one set of files encoded, stored, and helps really with the CDN and delivery of the content, or caching these contents at the edge. So yes, the industry is moving forward, but obviously devices have to support it. So that's the lagging part, and that's really trying to, I mean, the industry is pushing hard to have the devices support CMAF. And I mean, for some time, all the streaming providers are actually going to encode CMAF and other, you know, HLS and Dash formats, because they have to reach to the legacy devices. But eventually this would be phased out, and we're going to be using one single format with CMAF, with, again, a single encryption mode supporting all the different DRMs. Again, you're still talking about supporting PlayReady, Widevine, and Fairplay with a common encryption mode. And that would enable technically reduction in, again, CDN storage, reduction in content storage, and also latency. So one of the important part of CMAF is to be able to actually reduce latency using a technique called chunk encoding. And that's really another thing which is important. I'm sure there are other panels that are focusing on that.
Well, I'm not going to place a bet on whether HLS, Dash, or CMAF will sort of be dominant, but I know the MP4 underlying file format, the ISO-based media file format, at least has survived. Now, for our European friends, who, when CENC came out, had asked for the inclusion of Marlin as one of the DRMs. How is Marlin faring in the industry at this point?
So Marlin actually started back in 2005, and that was the very first, actually only open standard DRM, right? And the idea was basically letting every vendor to implement their version based on their specifications, rather than focusing on the big players who actually started later. I mean, PlayReady, Widevine, and Fairplay. Marlin actually got a lot of momentum in Europe and in Asia. I mean, still some of our largest streaming platforms in Asia, specifically China, are still using Marlin, right? And they will, because of all the devices that are actually out there and have to use Marlin. And it has been used for a lot of streaming platforms and IPTV systems in Europe, right? So that's important. Again, it has a lot of flexibility. It's approved for 4K and UHD based on the Movie Labs requirement. And so it can be adjusted. It can be used with CMAF. It can be used with any other. I mean, in terms of interoperability, it actually works perfectly with the rest of the DRM. So it's not something like different.
Okay, good. So Corey, do you all use watermarking on any of the content that goes out from Blizzard?
We we've been toying with the idea about watermarking for the last several years. Specifically, when the pandemic took, our plans for BlizzCon changed, which is the predominant vehicle in which we use, to talk about what the company's doing, new advancements in the games, new, progress with development and whatnot. So that show specifically was targeted for watermarking inclusion.
Mhm.
However, because of the pandemic, we had to kind of like slow our roll on some of that stuff and kind of put it aside. But now things are opening back up, and now we're starting to talk about what our 2022 strategies are going to be and beyond. And so watermark is now going to become another topic of discussion for us.
And what would the sort of pros and cons be to using watermarking from your standpoint?
Well, for us specifically, watermarking allows us to know where our content has gone to. If we're DRMing the content and we're, sending it out over these different video channels and different partners, we're limited by DRM to our distribution engagements. So, a company like YouTube or Twitch or Facebook that we generally do some of this BlizzCon streaming work too, doesn't accept our DRM. They do their own repackaging for us as part of their distribution method. So DRM doesn't really take into account some of those type of platforms, but when we're doing O&O, certainly DRM is a play. But we want to use watermarking in the future to figure out like where our content has not just necessarily leaked to as a definition, but we want to know who's actually interested in watching it, who's actually interested in reposting it in other places. So that allows us to actually take a different business approach of not like, the traditional, like, get legal involved and do all these takedowns, but really kind of like figure out like, hey, is there a gaming company somewhere else in the world that really wants to, deliver our content to their audience, and maybe they get 500,000, monthly average users. And we want to now stand up a licensing deal with these cats because now there's a rev share opportunity or some other kind of monetary finance vehicle that we can work out. So we can bring them in as a legit part of our distribution ecosystem as a partner, and not necessarily looked at as a foe or somebody that's pirating our content.
That's actually a really refreshing approach to it, being able to look at rev share instead of just completely squashing them. Ali, across the board, why is watermarking important for your customers, and what are some of the pros and cons in a broad part of the space?
Right. Sure. I agree with Corey as well, right? So first of all, to Corey's point, DRM is really protecting the delivery of the content from the streaming platform to the subscriber device. Once the subscriber is actually consuming the content, the content is decrypted. From that point on, whatever happens to the content is not protected by DRM. And that's where really forensic watermarking becomes to the play. So it's a complementary solution to DRM. And why? First of all, it's really a technology that helps you mitigate the risk of piracy. So maybe instantly you're not going to be able to use it, but to Corey's point, it's going to help you to know where your content is showing up. So the idea is that you embed a ID that is imperceptible inside the video that is tied to the session or tied to the subscriber device, then you can identify that device. And once you know which of your subscribers is behind the piracy, or if there is a content found in the wild market, in the wild web, that it's your content, that enables you to take actions. And pros and cons you mentioned, so these are all the pros, but the cons are what do you do next, right? And that's really the challenge for the industry, right? There's a lot of interactions or involvement from law enforcement needed if you are going to take actions. Or how do you turn this into revenue? That's the big question, right? Nobody has really identified what's the dollar value of saving from watermarking. We all talk about the scale of piracy, how big is the piracy, and watermarking is needed. But it's really hard to actually estimate how much dollar is going to bring back to the service providers when they implement watermarking. And to Corey's point, this is really a nice approach. All the industry have been talking about, if you see a part of the content, you have to shut it down right away, right? And there are challenges by going after your subscribers, right? In many countries, right? These are really legal issues that you need to solve, right? But if you can find a way to turn that subscriber or that service, part of the service, into additional revenue for you by a licensing deal, as Corey said, that's going to help you. And how do you do that? You really need to first identify who are those people and where are those content. So it's really interesting, and there are really cons, and but I mean, there is a lot of benefit. So I think it's evolving. One of the things I got to say is watermarking has had many cycles in the last 10 years, and I've been involved in those cycles. Like initially, movie labs and ECP requirements, when they started 4K requirements, they started to look into that. But that really didn't push it so far because the content was coming and being licensed without having watermarking technologies available in the market. Then the next step was really sports taking off, and then the technology needed for sports was really different. And then the last wave was really about the early release window, right? Which you had to have watermarking in order to do a premium WAD, right, when the movie is in theater. But again, that kind of stopped until pandemic hit, right? So there has been different waves. There has been a lot of work done, but unfortunately, it's not as other technologies like DRMs that is really used today. But to Corey's point, in future, there's more and more. And the cost of implementing watermarking is going down as well. That's another thing. Like for a lot of vendors, they think that as an extra cost that they don't want to deal with it, but that's changing. I mean, we offer DRM and watermarking as a bundle that is more attractive than just doing a DRM. So this is going to help a lot of adoption in the market.
Okay. Right. So like to that point though, the reason that costs are coming down is because streaming is so prevalent these days. It's basically become an alternative. If you have enough of the applications to make up the ecosystem of entertainment, value that you as a family or household, enjoy, all of that new content that's out there didn't exist, 10 years ago when it was mainly, pay-per-view and VOD platforms. You look at the Xbox video marketplace or PlayStation or some of these other Netflix and something like that. There's only a handful of those providers back then. Now, all of a sudden, the ecosystem is so large that, it makes sense that the cost per stream or per stamp is going to come down because there's so many people doing it.
And that is true, Corey. I mean, it's the volume play. Same thing that the CDN space saw is streaming delivery kicked up. Ali, one last question on watermarking. In the ad insertion space, we had a debate probably 5 years ago around server side versus client side. Do I understand there's also that potential for server side and client side in watermarking? And if so, just give me a little bit of an update on how that works.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so the idea is to embed an imperceptible mark on the content. You can do it before delivery, right? Or you could do it during consumption. So that's the notion of server side versus client side. When you do it before delivery, right, that means basically at the server side, you need to integrate the technology with your encoder and packagers, as well as your CDNs, to be able to generate a unique sequence of contents, right, for each users. It's a complicated process, but it's very robust, right? So you do it at the server side. You don't, you close the door for a lot of attacks that's happening at the client side to stop or block watermarking. But at the same time, you have to do a lot of integration with encoders or CDNs. And this is sort of what in the market they call A and B watermarking, which use like a stream of like A and B sequence for each user. Now, when it comes to the client-side watermarking, so you can have a theme client integrated at the device, right? And there are different ways, whether integrated at the chipset level or integrated with the player. And that really is interesting in the sense that it can be very efficiently done at the device level. And it's really good for live content, for example, right? Because anything that adds latency at the server side is gonna be a problem. So kind of client-side watermarking is kind of the approach for the live event to some extent. But at the same time, again, there is the fact that the robustness of the mark or the surface attack for the mark is different at the device side. Like they can attack the set-top box, they can attack the browser, right? So there are other techniques, obviously, like application shielding or application protection that should be used along with watermarking at the device level to be able to protect that technology. But basically, yes, there is a pros and cons. Depends on what you're looking at. So if you are going to look at live sports, I would say client-side watermarking is really something a lot of people look at. If you're looking at premium VOD or early release window specifically, the idea of the fact that the hackers have a lot of time, right? It's not like live event. So when they get the content, they have a lot of time to go and manipulate the content and attack. So putting a robust mark at the server side is actually more preferred for early release window. So that's kind of like the balance and the different approaches in the market.
So Corey, because your company does esports, and esports was growing really well before the pandemic, and then all of a sudden did a hockey stick during the pandemic. In fact, some of the stats that I saw said, the percentage of people doing gaming during the pandemic was much higher than the uptake of people doing streaming. What are some of the unique challenges you all have found with copy protection, during the pandemic and as esports continues to grow?
Well, we haven't really had a whole lot of problem in that space, to be honest. We'll have this conversation again when we get closer to doing BlizzCon again, because there's a big esports element of that broadcast, and some of that content will be, on our O&O player and our BlizzCon.com website. So that'll require a different set of technologies to protect that content. Our esports leagues today are primarily, in a distribution relationship with YouTube. So once we do the final handoff to YouTube acts as that last mile scale for us and that distribution. So we really kind of rely on YouTube to kind of like keep the content inside their ecosystem. And because it's, we want the content to be everywhere for everyone, it's easy to embed those YouTube players as long as people are being driven back to our main YouTube experience. So I don't think really have much of an issue with people taking the YouTube player embed and putting it on their own website. I mean, we'd prefer that they go to the main primary experience, because that's where we've intended the experience to be. But it goes back again to, we scale through co-streamers. We scale through our own, marketing campaigns around, the incentive drops and things like that we do in our broadcast. So we don't really have the same DRM requirements for our YouTube League stuff as we do with our BlizzCon content, because it's a much different product. Okay.
And now I'm going to come back to Ali with another question, but you mentioned something off air, and you can talk about it without naming the band. You mentioned sometimes we run into problems with co-streamers, and especially where it comes to audio licensing. Do you want to talk to that just briefly?
Sure. There was a story last BlizzCon when we did it in February. We had one of our music acts that had been at a previous BlizzCon. They decided to come back, and we asked them to come back, and they graciously accepted. So they were getting ready to do their thing, and we go live with that content segment. And we're streaming to YouTube and Facebook and Twitch and all these other different platforms. And it so happened that, it triggered the music itself, triggered, the audio takedown in an automatic way, because the bots or the robots in the cloud kind of like went after it and said, hey, we recognize this. We've got, permission to take this down. So they automatically like put the band hammer on it, and they replaced the music track. Actually, you could still see the band, but the music track was replaced with this like kind of orchestral, kind of weird, kind of zippy music, and it wasn't, and I'm sure it was, media rights free and all that kind of stuff. And they were doing what they normally do, because they're trying to protect the rights holders. But in this particular case, we actually had permission to use we had rights to the band, rights to the music. And so it turned into quite the controversy of like, how do you allow streamers and content creators to build program material that you're licensed for? How do you work with your partners in your ecosystem from a distribution standpoint to get them to not throw the hammer at you because their automatic protections kick in? And I think that that's something that not only myself, but other folks have ran into in the past. And I think that that's going to be another issue in regards to takedown requests, is to make sure that before you get hit, that you're doing the right legal things with those distribution providers to make sure they understand that, yes, you do have rights to this, and to be able to override those automatic measure or countermeasures that are on platforms today.
Well, and hopefully the lesson learned out of that was the developer went in and created a checkbox in the licensing rights that says, ignore the banhammer. Because I'm trying to think of Philip Glass's Koyaanisqatsi playing over a rock band. That just sort of seems really funny to think about.
Sure, but I don't think it's just really about developing a checkbox, because I think that any content creator can then go in and just checkbox that that feature, and then just stream whatever unlicensed content they want, and then it becomes a completely different problem. I think it has to be done on a business to business kind of standpoint, where there is legal transfer of understanding of ownership and rights to those music tracks, and even video itself. If you're running a television show or some other kind of like streaming entertainment program, and you're actually using like movie clips, those movie clips are still going to forensically be picked off, because they're doing the frame by frame interrogation on that content, and they'll end up blacking out your show or doing a digital takedown because they see you restreaming copyrighted material. So I think that it needs to be a business to business effort of some kind of legal entity of transfer of rights management across the different platforms in general.
Interesting. That's a really good point. Ali, anything to add to that? Obviously esports is an area you are getting into, but just to Corey's point here with sort of the unintended consequences of DRM, do you want to add anything to that?
Right. Yeah. I mean, obviously live sports is a big market, and esports is actually becoming a bigger market as well. And there is a lot that esports streaming platforms can learn from sports, actually live sports platforms. And when it comes to both platforms, right, whether it's live sports, a lot of events happening now that things are coming back to normal little by little. There are two aspects which are very important. One is really about the scalability of the platform, and when it comes to content protection, whether it's the DRM or a watermarking service, having the scalable kind of a cloud service, right, that enables meeting the peak demand in real time is important. Sports and esports is all about multi-millions of actually subscribers watching the content at the same time. So managing delivery of the DRM licenses, right, for example, to all those devices at the same time is a challenge, and is actually very critical in order to survive the business. And that's really one of the things that we really pay attention to, and our customers are happy about. So again, scaling up, using a cloud platform to scale up the massive actually number of concurrent users in real time. That's the main key. The other aspect is really about low latency, right? And so there's a lot of talk about low latency in the market. It actually applies to DRM and to multi-DRM platforms as well. It applies to content protection. So anything that we add workflow to the latency in the content protection workflow is a challenge, and we have to solve that. So again, there are techniques that we use for kind of the tight integration with the encoders when the on-the-fly packages are actually encrypting long content, or things in terms of delivery of the license. I mean, using the proxy service, for example, to deliver the licenses in real time, right, with the reduced latency, are the techniques that are very crucial for sports and live streaming and esports as well. One other thing that I want to mention, which maybe is a lot relevant to esports, also live sport, but in esports as well, is about the whole business model that relies on the streaming app. So the streaming app creates actually a attack surface, right? And there are multiple devices. So being able to protect the app itself, right? Whether it's about protecting the flow of the code, whether it's about protecting keys used for actually storing personal information, credit card information, or being able to actually block reverse engineering of the streaming app for either whether it's esports or any other streaming platform. That's very key. That's very critical now. And so that's really something that everybody needs to look at when it comes to business models that are relying on the apps to take advantage of the revenue for the service.
And I think that's referred to as app shielding in the industry.
Correct.
Is that something that you're seeing a significant interest around beyond just, say, streaming applications?
Right. So basically, application shielding or application protection has started a few years ago to be very much requirement in payment apps or banking apps, all the financial apps, as well as maybe healthcare apps, right? So those industries have taken off and have been using it. I mean, if you use your mobile banking, app, obviously it has application shielding technology used, right? Now on the streaming platforms, the same thing. We should leverage that technology because again, there's payments information in there. There is actually, even for the e-streamers, the thing is there is in-app purchase, right? So there's a lot of revenue associated to esports and gaming on the app that easily can be, manipulated, or the hackers can really bypass that in-app purchase, and even distribute the, revoked apps. And that's really the thing. If you don't use application shielding, you're leaving that door open for attackers to, attack your revenue, the hackers to attack your revenue.
Fair point. So Corey, do you all have apps that you use besides just working with the co-streamers? Do you have your own internal apps that streams come out through or distributed through?
We don't. We've talked about different, plans of attack that we would maybe employ if we were going to push, say, like a BlizzCon application to like Roku or Apple TV, Fire, et cetera, all of the ecosystem that exists out there today in terms of like the traditional or the new model of set-top box. But we didn't really see that there was, I mean, we have some experiences out there, but they all kind of drive back into our main O&O based experience. So there's much more we can do on a web-based playback and ecosystem than we can with the device ecosystem. And the way that some of the device certifications or the application certifications for those devices kind of come into play, it becomes a very arduous process. So now you have to basically hire a monster team to go manage the ecosystem of apps. And sometimes that just doesn't scale. And so when you look at a BlizzCon, we have, basically one weekend a year that we, do this big festival for our community. Is that really worth the investment of doing all of these different apps?
Fair point. So what are some of the, as you're looking forward to the next BlizzCon, what are some of the lessons you learned from the one back in February that will be implemented? And I'm not talking just content protection, but since you're one of the premier events in the esports world, I think the audience would be really interested to know.
So, obviously some of the things that we'd like to do, is get back to, in-person events.
Sure.
I think that we as humans and how we like to socially interact, it's important for us to get back to that, and safely, might I add, get back to a place where we can actually, communicate face to face again and kind of commingle and celebrate the things that we're commonly interested in. We're unable to do that currently today, but obviously, there's conversation about how we go back safely and when do we do it. And so that's one of the main things I think we learned from the virtual BlizzCon experience is it as cool as it was, there were some things that were wrong, like, the music act and stuff getting hammered on, but being able to interact with our community on a more intimate way is I think something that we want to try to get back to as soon as possible.
Okay. And what about a hybrid approach going forward? Because you may have people from countries abroad who may not be able to travel into the event.
Sure.
Is that model being explored as well?
Well, that's where we have our virtual ticket product, right? Even with our esports events coming up, we may not be doing a bunch of DRM on the actual streaming content because, again, we're using YouTube and whatnot to kind of scale those broadcasts out. But we want to get back to a hybrid mode where our television production on ground is essentially providing all of the feeds necessary to cut the show in the cloud. So all of our cloud production elements from the venue. There's two different shows in our world. What happens at the show venue and what happens online. So what happens online is really for that YouTube audience, right? It's for the Twitch audience. It's the things that you see in sports today. When you're watching a hockey game, you're not you're not watching the halftime show or the in between, periods in the intermission. You're not at the venue still. You're in New York. You're at whatever their offsite location is. So there's really two types of events that we see. the venue event is where you watch the sport actually happen in real time. But during the intermission process, you're up at the merch counter, or you're doing the other in-venue activations and whatnot. You're getting a beverage, you're chatting with your friends. There's no reason to broadcast that. So we have to package our show differently. Like even if we were in an O&O model, now all of a sudden it's just basically figuring out how we want to protect that content or protect the idea of where we know it's going. There's a lot of things we don't know without, putting a watermark on it and actually do the forensic tracking on it. And I think that's one of the innovations that we want to try to get more involved with, is to figure out, like, where is our content ecosystem going? I mean, earlier when we talked about, the server side versus client side, I think that there's a lot of value in doing client side stuff. I don't think that necessarily watermarking is one of those, because of the way that you can still take that stream and pop it into OBS or XSplit or even vMix and then retransmit it without having any harm to anybody. And the watermarking is not going to keep people from doing that, but certainly the client side will keep people from putting cameras in front of browsers and whatnot. But even that is not a foolproof system. So I'm sure that there's technology in the works from some company that is working on a way to take the device and browser ecosystem combinations to do watermarking in a much better way, where it's less susceptible to screen lift.
Okay, fair point. And I was laughing when you mentioned hockey game, because at the last hockey game I went to, in between the first and second period, they had a wiener dog race where they had 30 people show up, had to have their run across the ice and see who could do it the fastest.
You never see that on TV. I mean,
exactly. And then Zamboni, of course, had to come along behind them just to deal with something.
Right, of course.
So, Ali, from your standpoint, what are some of we've talked about watermarking, we've talked about traditional DRM. What are some of the other solutions out there, or sort of features coming forward in terms of copy protection?
Right. So I think one of the important aspects of the whole ecosystem to combat piracy is the content monitoring, right? So we talk about protecting the content from delivery to the device with DRM. We talk about actually using technology like watermarking to identify the source of piracy. But first, you have to find the content, right? You have to find the leaks, right? And more importantly is you have to understand or verify that that part of the content is licensed to who, right? That's the missing part. So the very first step is to really use techniques like web crawling or digital fingerprinting that actually are going to understand if part of the content is licensed to which entity. And that really enables you to go after the first level of, okay, from which let's say broadcaster or streaming platform, the content is being leaked. And then in order to close the loop, you really need to have the mitigation actions, right, planned. So are you going to stop delivery of the DRM license to these devices? Are you going to revoke these devices? Are you going to just send screen messages to say, hey, we know you're pirating the content, right? So, there are different ways that you have to have a plan for all of this. So again, there are other steps in the whole chain besides just watermarking and DRM that are needed in order to combat piracy in an efficient way.
So we had a question from the audience and this is an interesting question. Somebody asked, what's the best option for premium VOD with limited watch times, such as, a 48-hour window? And they backed that up with making a comment that said they recently received a message asking us how much we would pay for the person not to leak the film. Any way to track that kind of thing. But I guess the bigger question is, when you're talking limited windows of time, what are some of the options to use when you're looking at premium VOD content?
So in terms of streaming and the DRM technology, obviously DRM license has a lot of parameters to restrict access, including the duration of that content, right? So the way that the workflow works is basically the devices are authenticated using tokens, and these tokens are basically based off how the DRM licenses keys are refreshed, right? So you can actually set a DRM license to be valid only for a period of time. And that's really what you would need here for a premium VOD. And at the same time, they're key refreshing, right? By just when you set, when the token is valid and it's not expired, there's a request for new DRM licenses throughout the content. And that really enables generating new keys for every pieces of the content or for every replayback of the content. So you sell the VOD for the first time, right? The license can be valid for a certain period of time.
Okay.
I hope that answers, but that's
Yeah,
one
no,
of
I think that doesn't. So I think one of the things I heard you say there is making sure that every time somebody wants to rewatch the content, even in that 48-hour window, issuing a
exactly.
new. Okay,
Right.
good. So I guess we're coming down to the end here. We've talked about surface area, we've talked about app shielding and that kind of thing. Just sort of give us a quick overview or recap of some of the common attack modes that are used within the piracy ecosystem.
I think there's just a few things to mention here. One of the important one is obviously the leaks a lot of time is happening from HTTP splitters. We see that basically because previous versions of HTTP has been hacked, right? And there are a lot of devices out there in the market that are not using the latest HTTP version, right? There is actually a setting in DRM licenses with output control to limit the usage to a specific HTTP version. But a lot of service providers won't do enforcement to the latest version because that removes a lot of devices out of the access to the content. And therefore, it opens the door for professional hackers to actually use the HTTP stripper devices to grab the content in real time from HTML link and retransmit it through the origin server. So that's one of the angles that needs to be considered, right, for blocking. That's really a way of, surface for the attack. Now, the other thing which is really interesting is how these professional pirates are actually offering a service. They actually do offer an online discounted service, right, which is more attractive than the legal platforms. It has a portfolio of different contents, whether VOD or live, and it comes with a very professional made program guide that a lot of people actually make mistakes. So is it illegal or is it illegal, right? And they actually even get ad revenue because a lot of online ad networks confuse them or mistakes them with the legitimate, platforms. So that's the other thing. I mean, having the right content, actually bundle of contents that are more attractive with the right pricing is a way to actually reduce piracy. That's one of the things to consider. And the other aspect that a lot of piracy is happening from an open software platform based on, it's called Kodai boxes. It has been a lot of research that even in US, 95% of piracy is from the Kodai platforms. And that's really another aspect that, again, the software can be downloaded on many devices and enables really actually accessing a different content from portfolio of different content owners. And that's, again, another, common attack that we see in the market.
It's interesting that you say that about the HDCP splitters, because I've worked in the professional AV space where we, install system in corporate boardrooms and like that. Those companies will actually pay a licensing fee to be allowed legally to create, as you say, a splitter. There's a legitimate use for it, but I hadn't really thought about the fact that somebody could essentially use that to strip and do a retrans. So
exactly.
Corey, what since we're at the end here, any additional thoughts you want to add, or anything you sort of see from a copy protection standpoint going forward that your company is going to be looking at?
Not specifically that I haven't already kind of addressed or talked to at the moment. I think that the technology is going to get better. I hope that at some point down the road, we get to kind of this world of, common media format actually working on devices. I think, though, that when you look at, where Dash is available and where HLS is available and how the common encryption mechanisms work across those two streams, like a world of CMAF is great, but, at the end of the day, you still have the device manufacturers that are still, they have their patent attorneys and everybody else, and they all want their individual, rights in terms of their ecosystems, so Google and Microsoft and Apple and all these other companies, if we were able to kind of come together as an industry and be able to kind of coalesce, because if I could get one browser across, 5 different or 4 different devices, to have the same encryption and have the same video stream, it certainly simplifies my architecture and my operations, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know that we'll ever really get to that world, because Apple's got another visionary idea how they keep their phones secured, and Google has their thing, and the device manufacturers will vary depending on where you're at in the world. So I don't know that we'll always get to common ground, but I hope that that's part of the future conversation.
Now, I think you and Ollie mentioned something to me during our session the other day called Speak. Is that I can't remember if that was you or Ollie who talked about that as sort of a new encryption solution.
That was Ollie.
Yeah, no, so that's more about interoperability between different encoder vendors and the multi-DRM platforms, right? So this is, there are two actually aspects of it. One is CPIX, which is a content protection information exchange format. That's really part of -IF, and that's really defining a format for exchanging information between multi-DRM platforms and encoder vendors. So it's a standard, and that's the goal is here basically. Multi-DRM platforms or encoder packages should not use a custom interface, then they cannot scale, right? And we have to avoid vendor lock-in when there's one integration. You want to actually have flexibility to choose different encoder packages or multi-DRM platforms. So the industry is trying to solve that using CPIX, technically a standard. A variation of CPIX or a subset of CPIX, which has originally actually proposed by AWS, is called Speak. That's actually secure encoder and packager key exchange. That's really the standard to really deliver content keys from multi-DRM platforms to the packagers. And that's evolving at the same time along with the Speak, and they're converging. So the new version of Speak is going to match the latest version of CPIX 2.3. So that's kind of the important piece.
But I don't think it's really on the device and encoder perspective. It's really a client-based problem. The decode, the interop of those different DRM media formats, not only to protect the content on the device itself once it gets there, but also, ensuring that the device ecosystem itself is adhering to those same standards.
Absolutely. I totally agree. So that's a different problem. Absolutely. Right. Yes.
Well, and I think fundamentally, Corey, you raise a really good point, which is we can do DRM at the encoder. We can do watermarking insertion in the cloud, DRM keys in the cloud. But if at the end of the day, there are 3 different versions of Android on 3 different handset manufacturers, having worked in the old Flash player for mobile, consulting to them and knowing just the major problems they ran into there, fundamentally, while HTML5 and video tags were supposed to solve part of this problem, it actually seems like it just kicked the can down the road a bit further too. So
yeah, that's a good point.
Fair point. All right. Thank you, Ollie. Thank you, Corey, for being on. And at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Eric.
Yeah, that was a terrific discussion. Thank you, Ollie and Corey. And thanks to Intertrust for sponsoring this panel, and to Signient for sponsoring all of Streaming Media East Connect. We'll be signing off now and see you again in a half an hour.
All right.
When the director calls action.
And action.
When the game is on.
Pick it up. It's good.
Or it's time to save the universe again. Media Shuttle is there. Trusted by more than 25,000 media companies, Media Shuttle delivers, making it easy and secure to send any size file anywhere fast. The journey begins with Media Shuttle portals, customized and branded for any project and designed to be so easy, your end users will love it. All while giving operations teams complete control through a simple yet powerful admin interface. Add users, set permissions, customize file delivery specs, and report on all activity. Blast off with proprietary acceleration technology. Media Shuttle moves your content anywhere in the internet-connected world at hyper speeds. Along the way, your files are protected. Our commitment to enterprise-grade security has made Media Shuttle a preferred tool with Hollywood studios, major sports leagues, broadcasters, and more. With Media Shuttle, your files are never handed over to Signient. File movement is orchestrated between the end user's workstation and your storage, whether on-prem or in the cloud. Your IT team simply provisions your storage, connecting it to the Media Shuttle cloud service, and Signient handles the rest. Get started on your media shuttle journey today, a journey without limits.